You're nothing but a gold digger. Everyone here knows you only married my son for his money.
The champagne glass shattered against the marble floor, and the entire country club fell silent. "You're nothing but a gold digger." Richard Ashford's voice echoed through the grand ballroom, his face purple with rage. "Everyone here knows you only married my son for his money." Elena Martinez stood perfectly still, her emerald dress catching the light from the crystal chandeliers above. Around them, Boston's elite, the old money families who'd controlled the city for generations, watched with hungry eyes. This was the scandal they'd been waiting for. The Mexican immigrant who'd somehow snared one of the Ashford boys was finally being put in her place. What none of them knew was that the woman they'd spent 2 years mocking was about to destroy them all. 3 days earlier, Elena had been sitting in her modest apartment, the one she'd kept secret from everyone, including her husband, staring at the letter from Goldman and Associates. The private investigation firm had finally confirmed what she'd suspected for months. Her husband, James Ashford, was having an affair. But that wasn't even the worst part. The worst part was the text message chain they'd uncovered between James and his mistress, Brittany Caldwell, a trust fund princess from Connecticut. 2 more months, James had written. "Once we hit the 2-year mark, the prenup becomes void. Then I'll divorce her and take half of whatever she thinks she has. My father's already got the lawyers ready." Elena read that message 10 times. Each word burned itself into her memory. Hey, before we dive deeper into Elena's story, drop a comment and let me know where you're watching from. And if you love stories about justice, karma, and unexpected plot twists, hit that subscribe button. You won't want to miss what happens next. Now, let's get back to the moment that changed everything. She'd married James Ashford 18 months ago, believing, foolishly, she now realized, that he'd actually loved her. That someone could see past her background, her immigrant story, the fact that she'd worked 3 jobs to put herself through community college. She'd been so incredibly wrong. The Ashfords had never accepted her. Richard Ashford, the patriarch, made that clear at every family dinner. The snide comments about her accent, the questions about her family back in Mexico or wherever, the careful exclusion from women's committee meetings and society pages. And now she knew the truth. James had been playing her all along. The whirlwind romance, the proposal on that beach in Martha's Vineyard, the small wedding his family had insisted on. All of it had been a con. They were waiting for the prenup's 2-year clause to expire. Then they'd take her to court and destroy her. There was just one problem with their plan. But what the Ashfords didn't know, what nobody in Boston knew, was about to cost them everything. Elena's real story started 28 years ago in Jalisco, Mexico. Her mother Sofia worked as a seamstress. Her father had died before Elena was born. But Sofia had kept one massive secret. Elena's father hadn't been just any man. He'd been Diego Ramirez, son of one of Mexico's wealthiest families. When he died in a car accident 6 months before Elena was born, his family wanted nothing to do with Sofia or her baby. They'd offered her money to disappear, to never mention the Ramirez name again. Sofia took the money, not out of greed but out of fear. The Ramirez family had power, connections, a reputation for crushing anyone who threatened them. So she'd hidden the truth, even from Elena. When Sofia died of cancer during Elena's sophomore year at community college, she'd left her daughter a letter and a key to a safety deposit box. Inside that box were documents that revealed an impossible truth. Sofia had been a financial genius. That initial payment, $500,000 in 1997, had been transformed through careful investments into a portfolio worth over $2 billion. Elena had been a secret billionaire for 6 years, and no one had the slightest clue. She'd kept the secret for good reasons. The money came with complications. The Ramirez family could still contest her claim. So she'd left it alone, invested it carefully, grew it quietly. She'd continued working as a cultural consultant, making decent money on her own, living modestly, building her own identity. She'd told herself she'd reveal the truth when the time was right. Then she'd met James at a conference in Seattle. He'd seemed different, humble, genuinely curious about her ideas. When he'd proposed after 10 months, she'd actually believed he loved her for herself. She'd been planning to tell him the truth after their first anniversary. That decision nearly destroyed everything. Now, sitting in her secret apartment, looking at proof of his betrayal, Elena realized something. The Ashfords had given her an unexpected gift. They'd revealed their true nature before the prenup expired, before she'd told them anything, before they could reposition themselves. And that's when she'd started planning something they'd never see coming. The next morning, Elena called her lawyer. Not the family attorney the Ashfords knew about, but David Kim, a shark from New York who specialized in taking down wealthy frauds. They're planning to wait for the prenup clause to expire, she explained. I have 6 weeks. 6 weeks to do what? David asked. 6 weeks to let them think they're winning, Elena said quietly, and then to show them exactly who they've been dealing with. David was silent for a moment. Then he laughed, sharp and delighted. Oh, this is going to be beautiful. Over the following 3 weeks, Elena played her part perfectly. What the Ashfords didn't know was that every insult, every sneer, every condescending smile they took for submission was being carefully documented. She was the submissive daughter-in-law at family dinners, absorbing Richard's insults with downcast eyes. She smiled graciously when James's mother Patricia suggested she take etiquette classes before spring charity season. She even befriended Brittany Caldwell at a gallery opening, complimenting her dress, all while knowing Brittany was sleeping with her husband. But one night, the mask almost slipped. It happened at a private family dinner. Just Elena, James, and his parents. Richard was in rare form, 3 whiskeys deep, holding court about the immigrant problem while looking directly at Elena. They come here with nothing, he said, cutting his steak with aggressive precision, expecting handouts, expecting to marry up into families that actually built something. Patricia nodded along, sipping her wine. James said nothing. He never did. Elena felt something cold settle in her chest. Not anger, she'd moved past anger. This was calculation. You're absolutely right, Richard, she said softly. He looked surprised. He'd been trying to provoke her. People should build their own wealth, Elena continued. Create their own legacy. Not just inherit it and pretend they're special because of who their grandfather was. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Richard's face went red. Are you implying? I'm not implying anything, Elena said, meeting his eyes. I'm just agreeing with you. People should earn what they have. What she didn't say, what she was desperately holding back, was, I've earned more than you could imagine, and I'm about to prove it. James grabbed her arm as they left, hard enough to bruise. What the hell was that? He hissed once they were in the car. What was what? Elena kept her voice level. You don't talk back to my father. You don't. He caught himself, softened his tone, remembered he was supposed to be the loving husband for 6 more weeks. Look, I know he can be difficult, but you have to play the game, Elena. Just a little longer. She looked at him. This man she'd loved. This man who'd proposed to her on a beach at sunset, who'd told her she made him want to be better. This man who was counting down the days until he could destroy her. You're right, she said quietly. Just a little longer. James smiled, thinking he'd won. He had no idea what was coming. While Elena played the dutiful wife, David and his team were building a case that would bury the Ashfords. They documented James's affair, hotel receipts, text messages, photos. Meticulous evidence that would void the prenup's protections. But that was just the beginning. They started digging into Ashford Industries. What they found was stunning. The company Richard claimed was worth $800 million. It was actually worth about $340 million. And that was being generous. The rest was debt, offshore accounts, creative accounting that crossed several legal lines. Patricia's charitable foundation? She'd been taking administrative fees that were way too high to be legal. The Ashfords had built their entire empire on lies and borrowed money. But Elena's breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Harold Ashford, Richard's younger brother. Harold was the black sheep, cut out of the inheritance, mocked at family gatherings because he'd become a professor instead of joining the family business. Elena had always been kind to him, so one evening Harold called her. "Can we meet?" he asked. "Somewhere private?" They met at a diner 30 minutes outside Boston. Harold looked tired. "I need to tell you something," he said, "and I'm probably betraying my family by doing it. But I've watched them destroy every decent person who gets close to them. And you're decent, Elena. What do you want to tell me?" "The company isn't what Richard claims. It's leveraged to hell. He's been moving debt around for years, keeping up appearances. One good audit would reveal that the Ashford empire is built on sand." Elena's heart raced. This was it. The final piece. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. Harold smiled sadly. "Because I know what they're planning. James is my nephew. I love him. But he's his father's son." He paused. "Get out before they destroy you." What Harold didn't know was that Elena wasn't planning to run. She was planning to fight. 2 weeks before the country club gala, everything almost fell apart. Elena came home early one afternoon and found James on the phone in his study. The door was cracked open. "Doesn't suspect anything," he was saying. "She's completely clueless. After the gala He turned and saw Elena standing in the hallway. For 3 seconds, neither of them moved. "Who was that?" Elena asked, keeping her voice curious, not accusatory. James's face went through several expressions before settling on casual. "Just work stuff. Boring conference call." Sounded important. "Not really." He walked over, kissed her forehead. The gesture made her skin crawl. "How was your day?" This was it. This was her moment to confront him, to show her hand early, to ruin everything she'd been building. Elena smiled. "Fine. Long. I'm going to take a bath." She walked away, feeling his eyes on her back. In the bathroom, she locked the door and called David with shaking hands. "He almost caught me listening," she whispered. "I think he suspects something." "Does he know about the investigation?" "I don't think so. But David, what if they move up their timeline? What if they don't wait for the prenup clause?" There was a long pause. "Then we act now," David said. "We file tomorrow. We expose everything." Elena looked at herself in the mirror. She'd come so far, built this plan so carefully. "No," she said. "We stick to the plan. They want their show at the country club? We'll give them one they'll never forget." But that decision to wait almost cost her everything. The night before the gala, Elena couldn't sleep. She kept thinking about her mother, Sophia, who'd worked herself to exhaustion to give Elena opportunities, who'd invested that money so carefully, never touching it, building a future for a daughter she knew would need it. Sophia had faced men like Richard Ashford her whole life. Men who assumed that because she was a seamstress, because she was Mexican, because she was a woman, she couldn't possibly be their equal. She'd proven them wrong with numbers in ledgers they'd never see. Now it was Elena's turn. But doubt crept in anyway. What if the Ashfords had lawyers she hadn't anticipated? What if they'd hidden assets even better than she'd found them? What if Harold had been setting her up, feeding her false information so they could humiliate her even more thoroughly? At 3 a.m., her phone buzzed. A text from David. "Everything's ready. Trust the plan. Tomorrow you change your life." Elena looked at the message for a long time. Then she got up, went to her closet, and pulled out the emerald dress she'd been saving. Tomorrow, the Ashfords would call her a gold digger in front of everyone who mattered in Boston. And tomorrow she'd show them what real gold looked like. The Founders' Gala was exactly the spectacle the Ashfords had planned. 300 of Boston's elite, all dressed in their finest, all watching carefully for any sign of scandal or weakness. The Ashfords held court like royalty. Richard, glad-handing fellow CEOs. Patricia, presiding over the women's auxiliary like a queen. James, playing the dutiful son. And Elena, in her emerald dress, playing the role of the doomed immigrant wife for the last time. The first hour was almost normal. Polite conversations. Careful dances around the real tensions everyone could sense building. Then Richard clinked his glass for attention. "I'd like to make an announcement," he said. his voice carrying across the ballroom. Elena's heart began to pound. This was it. As many of you know, family is everything to the Ashfords, Richard continued. Legacy, tradition, the values that built this city. His eyes found Elena in the crowd. And sometimes, protecting that legacy means making difficult decisions. Patricia was smiling. James looked down, playing his part, the conflicted son. I've decided to make some changes to the family trust, Richard said. Effective immediately. Changes that will ensure Ashford wealth stays in Ashford hands, with people who understand its value. The message was clear to everyone in the room. This was about Elena. Someone, probably Patricia, had arranged it perfectly. As Richard finished speaking, someone bumped into Elena, causing her to drop her champagne glass. It shattered against the marble floor. The entire room fell silent, and Richard Ashford, right on cue, delivered his line. "You're nothing but a gold digger." His voice echoed through the ballroom. "Everyone here knows you only married my son for his money." This was the moment they'd been planning for months. What they didn't know was that Elena had been planning too. Elena stood perfectly still. Around her, Boston's elite watched with hungry eyes. This was supposed to be her humiliation. The moment she'd run out crying. The moment the Ashfords won. Instead, Elena bent down and picked up a piece of the broken glass. She examined it thoughtfully. Then she looked up at Richard Ashford and smiled. "A gold digger," she said softly. Her voice carried in the silence. "That's what you called me?" "You know what you are," Richard said. But some of his confidence had faded. Elena's calm was wrong. This wasn't how she was supposed to react. "I do know what I am," Elena agreed. She pulled out her phone. Not the regular iPhone James knew about, but the secure one David had given her. "Would you like to know too?" And that's when everything changed. Elena turned to address the entire room. 300 of Boston's most powerful people. The ones who'd whispered about her, excluded her, made jokes at her expense. They were about to become witnesses. "My name is Elena Sofia Martinez Ramirez," she said clearly. "My father was Diego Ramirez of the Ramirez Industrial Group. My mother was Sofia Martinez, a seamstress who was also, it turns out, a brilliant investor." She paused, letting that sink in. "When she died, she left me a portfolio currently valued at approximately $2.3 billion. The silence in the room wasn't just quiet anymore. It was heavy. Someone gasped. Elena saw Patricia Ashford's face go white. "I have controlling shares in 15 companies," Elena continued, her voice steady. "I own property in 6 countries. Last year, my investment returns alone were more than the entire actual value of Ashford Industries." She looked directly at Richard. His face had gone from purple to gray, which, by the way, is worth about $340 million. Not the $800 million you claim in every interview. She smiled. "I had my people run a real audit. Would you like me to share it with the authorities? Or should we discuss the offshore accounts, the creative accounting, the fact that your empire is one bad quarter away from total collapse?" "Elena." James had stood up, his face shocked. "Sit down, James," she said coldly. "We're not done." She swiped to another folder on her phone. "Should we talk about Brittany now? Should I show everyone the texts where you two plan to take me for everything after the prenup expired?" Brittany Caldwell, standing near the bar, looked like she wanted to disappear. Elena's voice was calm, almost gentle. "That made it worse. I kept my identity secret because I wanted to build my own life. I wanted to be valued for myself, not my money. I thought if I found someone who loved me without knowing about the wealth, that would be real." She looked around the room, at all of them. "Instead, I found a family so obsessed with wealth that they couldn't see value in anything else. So obsessed with their own superiority that they assumed anyone different must be inferior. So arrogant that they thought they could con me out of money I didn't even have." She walked closer to Richard. He actually took a step back. "You called me a gold digger, Richard. But what do you call a family that befriends someone, marries her, plans to destroy her, all for money they assume she'd take from them?" What do you call people who build their entire social position on lies, debt, and inherited wealth they've squandered? Nobody answered. The silence was deafening. I call them the Ashfords, Elena said quietly, and with those words she ended them. The aftermath was swift and brutal. Within 24 hours, news of her revelation had spread everywhere. The story was too good. The immigrant gold digger who'd been a billionaire all along. The old money family exposed as frauds. David Kim filed for divorce that same night, citing infidelity and fraud. The prenup that was supposed to protect the Ashfords now protected Elena. James had been unfaithful, he was in breach. He would get nothing. But Elena wasn't done. She'd contacted the authorities about Ashford Industries. She'd tipped off investigators about Patricia's foundation. She'd called in favors from board members, people who were suddenly very interested in removing the Ashfords from their positions. The house of cards fell fast. Richard was forced to resign as CEO after an emergency board meeting. The company was sold to private equity, saving it from bankruptcy but erasing the Ashford name from the business their reputation had been built on. Patricia lost her position on 3 charitable boards. The society pages that had fawned over her now ran stories about her financial improprieties. James found himself unemployable. The tech companies that had hired him for his name now wanted nothing to do with him. Brittany's family sent her to Switzerland indefinitely. And the country club where Richard had called Elena a gold digger? She bought a controlling stake in it. The board voted to accept her reforms, opening membership to diverse applicants, establishing scholarships for young professionals, and, in a move that made headlines, removing Richard Ashford from membership entirely. The Ashfords didn't just lose. They were erased. 3 months later, Elena sat in her new office overlooking Boston Harbor. She'd sold the apartment she'd shared with James, bought a penthouse that suited who she actually was. She'd also established the Sophia Martinez Foundation, dedicating $500 million to supporting immigrant entrepreneurs and women in business. David Kim was sitting across from her, grinning. The divorce was finalized this morning. James signed everything. He's getting exactly what the prenup specified for a cheating spouse. Nothing. And the companies? All approved. You now own controlling stakes in 3 companies where the Ashfords held board positions. They've all been asked to resign. David leaned back. In 20 years of practicing law, I've never seen anyone execute revenge this perfectly. You didn't just beat them. You erased them. Elena looked out the window at the city below. She thought about her mother, working late into the night at her sewing machine, building a fortune in secret, protecting her daughter. She thought about all the nights at the Ashfords' dinner table, absorbing their contempt, believing she somehow deserved it because she was different. I didn't do this for revenge, she said quietly. I did it because they needed to learn that wealth doesn't make you better than anyone, and that underestimating someone because of where they're from is the most expensive mistake you can make. Fair enough, David said. So what's next for the billionaire formerly known as a gold digger? Elena smiled. Next, I'm going to build something real. Something my mother would be proud of. She turned back to David. And I'm going to do it as exactly who I am. No more hiding. A year later, Elena's foundation had funded 200 small businesses, all run by immigrant entrepreneurs. She'd become a sought-after speaker. Forbes had featured her on their cover, the billionaire who hid in plain sight. She'd also started dating Harold Ashford. The family black sheep had reached out to apologize for his brother, and they discovered they had more in common than either expected. He didn't need her money. He was happy with his professor's salary. She didn't need his name. They were just 2 people who'd both been underestimated, who understood what it meant to define success on your own terms. The Ashfords themselves had scattered. Richard and Patricia moved to Florida, where Richard told anyone who'd listen about how he'd been betrayed. James was working a mid-level job in Atlanta, having discovered that without his family's name and money, he was remarkably ordinary. Elena didn't think about them much anymore. She'd gotten her justice, made her point, and moved on. But sometimes, when she spoke at conferences or mentored young entrepreneurs, she would tell her story. And she always ended the same way. They called me a gold digger because they couldn't imagine I might have my own gold. They saw my background, my difference, and they assumed I was less. That's their failure, not mine. She would pause, looking at her audience, often filled with people who looked like her, who'd come from where she'd come from, who'd been underestimated their whole lives. Never let anyone else's limited imagination define your worth, Elena would tell them. And never, ever let them see you coming until you're ready to change everything. The advice had served her well. In the end, the Ashfords had been right about one thing. Elena Martinez had married into their family for money. She just hadn't needed theirs. She'd had her own all along. If you enjoyed the story of justice and karma, don't forget to subscribe and hit that notification bell. Drop a comment. Have you ever been underestimated? How did you prove them wrong? See you in the next story.